Welcome back to the War of the Rings series. So, let's talk about the phases. So the phases are, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings or Middle-earth strategy battle game, you'll be familiar with how the phases work. So they're interwoven. So I move, you move, I shoot, you shoot. Then fighting is sort of done simultaneously, but it's picked by the person with what's called priority. Now, priority is very important. The player with priority moves first, shoots first, and then picks the order of the fights. And a few other things, but don't worry about that for now. Unlike Middle-earth strategy battle game is a phrase you're going to hear me say a lot. If you're familiar with Middle-earth or Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, it's all in one game. If you're familiar with how that works, things will be very familiar to you here, but there's some very key differences that we need to look at. So don't think just because you know how to play Middle-earth, you know how to play this. This game was released in 2008, which is a long time ago. And it's got some cool experimental ideas that the team is working on. So let's start with the phases. You start by rolling for priority. Now priority is basically both sides roll a dice. Whoever scores the highest gets to choose who has priority in that turn. Unlike Middle-earth strategy battle game. So basically, if I roll a 6 and you roll a 4, I say, you know what, I want priority this turn, or I say, I want you to have priority this turn. Now, why would you ever want to give the enemy priority? Well, it's not very common, but normally in the first turn you might not want priority, you might want the enemy to come forward and you can see what they're doing and react to them. If you've got a cavalry army and you're sort of on the edge of the charge range and your opponent's mostly infantry and they're a little bit further back and they're not going to be doing any charging, but if you charge in first, maybe they'll come in and envelop you or something, or they'll react to that. So you might not actually want to go first. And this is a break from Middle-earth strategy battle game where if you roll highest, you get priority. There's no choice. I like the choice system. Doesn't come up very much. It lets you ask that fun questions like, well, who would you like to have priority this turn? And the person rolls their eyes and say, well, I'll have it. But it's a little bit of fun. And so priority determines who gets to go first, and they're the sort of active player, the player with priority, the person in charge. And then you've got things like heroic moves, which can interrupt the flow, but the flow generally stays the same. Again, we'll get into that a little bit later. If you get a tie, you're supposed to just keep rolling until somebody wins. We steal a rule from the Middle-earth strategy battle game, in that ties go to the person who did not have priority last turn. So if I had priority last turn, we both roll a 2, you get it this turn. This way, I had a game a few weeks ago where I had 6 of the 7 turns of priority, just kept rolling high. And the opponents only got priority because we both rolled 4s or something. So it's a cool little rule. Basically, can't keep, if you've got the flow, you're more likely to lose it, but not by much. But it's a cool house rule, but that's an example. So whenever we do something different to what the main rules say, I'll make it very clear that it's a house rule. So priority basics. Both sides roll a d6. Whoever scores the highest wins. In the event of a draw, roll again, or the side who had it last turn loses it for the next turn. So let's just talk about, that's the priority phase. Let's talk about some important basics. So, you can pre-measure at any time. You can measure anything at any time, from anywhere to anywhere else. You can measure just 7 inches in the middle of the table if you want for some reason. You don't have to measure weapon ranges. You can, but you could be like, I wonder if they're 17 inches away, and you can measure out 17 inches. It means nothing, but you can do it. Your troops don't have shooting weapons. You can still measure out bow range just to see. You can basically measure at any time, is the short way of saying that. Let's look at how a unit is actually made up. So I'll put some pictures up here of a mix of some things, of some different units. So let's look at infantry first, because they're the easiest. Infantry are 8 to a tray. Now, that's standard, 8 to a tray infantry. If you're familiar with the Middle-earth strategy battle game, and I'll put the thing up here, you can see a stat sheet for, let's say, Warriors of Minas Tirith, a stat sheet for them. If you're familiar with Middle-earth strategy battle game, you'll be familiar with this stat sheet, but there's a few little differences. Let's look at the race/type. That's not really that important right now. Apart from spirit or maybe elf, there are certain times when something has like hatred men or attack bonuses against elves or its spirits wound on different values. But for now, let's not worry about any of that. Ignore race/type for right now. All we're worried about is infantry and the letters and numbers. So M stands for movement or move. This is the amount that the unit can move. It's fairly standard. You can do things to mess with it. That's later. But just for standard right now, M is move, normally about 6 inches. F. Now F is separated here. So there's a number, a slash, a number, and then a plus sign. So the first number before the slash, that will be this number here, on this side, is called the fight value. And that's very important in close combat. Fight value gives you more attacks, basically. If your fight is higher than your opponent's. We'll get to that later. The second number is your shoot value. Your shoot value gives you more dice when you are shooting. It's not a hit value. The plus there is basically a holdover from Middle-earth strategy battle game. You can ignore the plus, get your shoot value, subtract it from 5, that's your bonus dice. So if you've got a shoot value of 4, you get 1 bonus dice. You've got a shoot value of 6, you actually lose a dice. Shoot value of 2, gain 3 dice. That sort of thing. Again, don't worry about that for now, we'll get to it later, but this is the fight value and shoot value. S is for strength. Strength is how hard you hit. It's straight from Lord of the Rings. You compare your strength to your opponent's defense. That's how you do damage in close combat. Shooting weapons have their own strength value. We'll get to that later. For now, strength is your warrior's strength. It's how hard they hit in combat. D is for defense. Now you'll see here in this example there is a bracket. Don't worry about the bracket. The bracket is just shields. So infantry get a +2 bonus to their defense for having shields when attacked in the front. Cavalry only get a +1. So I say that now only so you don't look at it and go, well, what does that bracket mean? I'm confused by that. Don't worry about the bracket. D is your defense. Strength is compared to defense on a fancy chart that we'll look at later. That is different from the Middle-earth strategy battle game chart for some unknown reason and is very weird. But you can figure it out. But it's tricky. Strength is compared to defense Strength is compared to defense, as is common in very many war games, to give you a number that you must roll equal to or higher than to do damage. A is attacks. Now, 8 attacks seems like quite a lot for a Warrior of Minas Tirith, but remember we're talking about a tray of 8. So each tray, each company, we'll get to that in a second, each tray has 8 attacks minus the amount of miniatures that have been killed. So if you've got 2 miniatures dead, you'll have 6 attacks. Very easy, very basic. Some units, and I can think of one unit, I think it's Galahiram Knights or Knights of Rivendell, have 4 attacks, which means 2 attacks per guy. But almost all basic infantry have 8 attacks, and cavalry will have 2, 1 per miniature. So, I'm going to put up a picture of the Knights of Minas Tirith. If I can find one, Knights of Minas Tirith stat sheet here. You'll notice the R. The R stands for resilience. Now, the R of infantry is almost always 1, unless they're particularly elite, but don't worry about that. And the R of cavalry is almost always 2. So, R is the amount of hits you can take before you have to start removing miniatures. So, for infantry with an R of 1, every hit you take is a dead miniature. For cavalry, every 2 hits is a dead miniature, and after that round is done, those excess hits are discounted. So you don't have to worry about tracking wounds. You don't have to worry about putting dice next to miniatures to keep a track of things. R value applies to the fight, then you don't need to worry about excess. Some infantry have an R of 2, It works the exact same. 2 hits to do a kill. Again, another house rule is that we say if infantry have an R of 2 or more, I don't think anything has a resilience of more than 2, but if you have a resilience of 2, you only need to put 4 infantry on the base and then put 4 base fillers. Thinking of things like Uruk-hai Berserkers. So you might only have 4 Uruk-hai Berserkers on a base instead of 8. I know my friend has 8 werewolves for his Angmar army, and they look much better on a base of 4 than a base of 8. Half trolls. I'm trying to think of anything else, but things with resilience of 2 generally look better on a base of 4 instead of 8. It means you have to buy less models of what are normally quite expensive infantry. Also, it just kind of looks cooler that there's, big guys, less of them doing more damage. It just looks more visually better. Anyway, C is courage. Courage works the exact same way it does in a Middle-earth strategy battle game. You roll 2d6, you add your courage, and you have to beat 10. That's it. That's all you have to do. Just get to 10 or higher. Courage 3 is considered very standard. Anything better than 3, because 3 plus 2d6, the average is 7. So 3 plus 7 is 10, is where that number comes from. So some heroes have courage 6, courage 7. They're going to be fine. So yeah, courage is just when you have to do a courage test, something scary, something bad happens. That's the unit's courage. MT is might. Now, again, I don't want to keep saying this, but Middle-earth strategy battle game, you have might, will, and fate. We don't worry about will and fate. Cast as much magic as you want. Don't worry about your heroes dying. It happens or it doesn't happen. Don't worry about it. Might is the only trackable stat you need to worry about. Might is used to do heroic actions. So move, shoot, charge, and fight are the 4 basic heroic actions. Lets you interrupt the play. So basically, if you lose priority and you want to move first with that unit, you can use a point of might to do that. We'll go into that in more detail later. Don't worry about that for now. Might can be used to modify dice that the formation rolls. So say, for example, you need to do an extra wound to kill something. You can use a point of might to do that extra wound. You can take a 3, turn it into a 4, get a kill. If you roll a 1, you need a 3. You've got to use 2 points of might. If you roll a 1, you need a 6. You've got to use 5 points of might. Good luck with that. Very rarely is that worth it. Anyway, might is this little resource you have that you can play with. It's a mix between the tactical ability of that individual commander and their heroism. So Boromir has 6 points of might, just like in the standard skirmish game. And I can tell you, as somebody who dumped all 6 points of might in one dice roll, it's really powerful because Boromir can just crush. It's even better when you get them back. That's way later on, but we'll get to that. Aragorn gets a free point of might every turn. So Aragorn is constantly spending might because he's very aware of what's going on. He's a tactical commander, but he's also good in combat. So maybe he's putting that extra arrow in that gets the kill, or he's making that swing that decapitates that extra orc or something. So anyway, might is a hero-specific thing. Your units don't have might. The heroes in them have might. Heroes, very short. We'll get to them in a second. I just need to go through the points and upgrades. Ignore that. Ignore the points value of how much this stuff costs. Ignore what they're armed with. Hand weapon just is the basic default. If it doesn't say you're armed with a hand weapon, you're not. That matters. Anyway, ignore the war gear. Ignore the upgrades like buying shields and things. Don't worry about that for now. And ignore all special rules. I will not be talking about special rules until after the 4 phases are introduced. And we're in the priority phase. The first of the 4, we're not going to worry about special rules at all. Unless they're directly relevant, which very few of them are. So, I used the word company before. What's a company? Well, the tray, company, think of the word tray. Company, tray. It's the 8 infantry or the 2 cavalry on a base. That's a company. Multiple companies form formations. So if you've got 4 infantry units, they form a 4-company formation. Or a 3-company formation for 3. Let's start with 3. So I've got 3 companies of infantry. That's a formation. If I've got 3 companies separate from one another, that's 3 formations of 1. Heroes are added to the trays. So for example, I have an infantry company of a bunch of elves, and I want to put Eladan in there. Then I just take my Eladan miniature and I put him in the infantry company. If he wants to go into a cavalry company instead, you take him out, you put the infantry model back, take a cavalry figure out, and you put him in the cavalry company. It's just that simple. Heroes don't have to buy horses. They don't have to be infantry or cavalry for the whole game. They can mount and dismount as much as they want. So, you have your trays. Everything goes in the trays. Nothing's sort of outside of the trays. Nothing's really hanging around. It's all very neat. And you just move everything in the trays. 2 man or 2 orc or 2 warg or 2 whatever for cavalry. 8 for infantry. Which means in a standard box you get 3 trays from a 24-person box. Or 3 trays of infantry per 24-man infantry box, or 3 trays of cavalry per 6-man cavalry box. I like cavalry armies because I only have to paint about a third of the figures, and I get massive 2,000-point armies. Both my War of the Ring armies are actually cavalry armies. I have a Kharn force. Let me see if I can find a picture. The Easterlings are a friend of mine, but so I've got a Kharn force and I've got a Rohan force. So they're both all mounted armies, which are pretty fun. Although, of course, not as good on the defense. Anyway, that's way off topic. So, eight figures per company, and then the companies make up formations. And for cavalry, 2 figures per company, and the companies make up formations. Monsters are their own formation, completely independent. So 1 troll is 1 formation. 2 trolls are 2 formations. They're not. You can't have a company of monsters. They're all their own formation. Some heroes cannot leave the unit. Unit captains can't leave. Epic heroes, they can jump around as much as they want. And some heroes, like Arathorn, are actually purchased for their particular formation. So they can't leave that formation. So that's the basics of it. Heroes can move around, some can't, and you don't need to worry about special sabo bases or putting them next to it and forgetting where they are. Everything just sits on those company trays. So, let's just look at how heroes interact with formations just before we get into anything else. Before their formation moves, a hero can join another formation within 18 inches. It doesn't have to be in line of sight. It doesn't even have to be get toable. There could be a giant wall in between. There could be a chasm splitting the table in half. The hero just moves 18 inches, goes in that unit. I mean, common sense may prevail, but the rules say you just pick him up and you put him over there. You then replace the hero with an infantry figure or a cavalry figure, and you take a cavalry infantry figure out of that unit and put a hero in. So you don't gain an extra base when a hero joins. He displaces someone. And of course, when Eladan from the infantry unit joins a cavalry unit, he gets a horse. When he goes from the cavalry unit to the infantry unit, he leaves his horse behind. So you do actually need mounted and on-foot figures if you want to be doing that, but generally in a game, I've got Gandalf here in front of me, I just finished painting. I don't have a mounted Gandalf the Grey with me right now. So if I was playing a game, I would have Gandalf in infantry units. If I had him only on horseback, I would just play with him only in cavalry units. It's like that, but I mean, if you really get down to it, just take a miniature out and put Gandalf next to the base. I'm sure it wouldn't be a big problem. And then after the heroes moved around, they do their own thing, and then everything acts as normal from there. So let's do a quick recap. Roll a d6 at the start of the turn. Whoever rolls highest chooses who gets priority. The person with priority is the active or first player who does everything first, but all the turns are interwoven. So I move all my stuff, you move all your stuff. I shoot all my... I decide which order the fights are worked out. 8 men to an infantry tray, 2 to a cavalry tray. Monsters are on their own. Trays or companies make up formations. And those two terms are very important. So company is the tray, formation is the unit. Casualties are removed from a tray at a time. You've got 8 men on a tray. You take 7 casualties, 7 men come off that tray. You can't have 3 trays and take 2, 2, 2, and 1. Doesn't work like that. No musical wounds. Musical wounds was an old, I don't know if it still is, but it was a 40k concept where you could have knobs. Orc knobs were especially bad at this, musical wound knob squads, where you could have a wound on 10 different guys. Instead of killing 5 of them, you had 10 of them with 1 wound on each. That's not how War of the Ring works. You have to destroy a company before you can do another one. And I will mention this here as a final point. Once the last company in a formation, so once the last tray, out of all the other trays in that unit, has been depleted to 50% or less, so it's got 1 cavalry or 4 infantry models left, it is immediately destroyed. So, if you've got 10 trays of goblins and you lose 9 trays, you're fine. If you lose 9 trays and 4 goblins, the unit is destroyed. Just a handy rule. It makes running single infantry units that don't have a particular special rule, which we're not concerned about now, a bit different. So the game encourages you to have big units. Anyway, that's by the by, a little factoid. Stay tuned next time for the movement phase, which will be a little bit more dynamic and active. So thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.